Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm okay. I think we're winging it today.
We are winging it. Let me introduce us. I'm Robert Wright. This is the Wright Show, available not just on streaming video, as some people mistakenly believe, but also as an audio podcast available at your nearest podcast app. And you are Mickey Kaus. As some people are too young to know, you are actually a co-founder of Blogging Heads, but then you went to the dark side, which is to say you became a Trump supporter. And we're going to talk about Trump mainly today. It's been about a year of his presidency. So we're going to give him his 1 year checkup. I think he'll get one positive evaluation, one negative, it's safe to say. Should I add anything by way of preface?
No. You could say I blog at kausfiles.com.
You blog at kausfiles.com. And your Twitter handle is?
And I mainly tweet at Kaus Mickey, Kausmickey. It's been a
never mind. Go ahead.
It's been a long downward decline. Soon I'll just be standing on the street corner yelling at people.
Soon you'll be begging to do Blogging Heads TV.
I think I asked for this one, Bob.
What?
I asked to have this one.
Did you? I thought I asked. Did you ask?
I don't know why I did.
That's another sign of your decline if you're starting to be the one who's asking.
Pathetic as that.
But as long as we're plugging stuff, do you know about the Mindful Resistance newsletter, Mickey?
No.
Oh well, that is a marketing failure on our part. It's a weekly newsletter you should subscribe to on grounds of know your enemy, because we are not exactly pro-Trump as the term resistance suggests.
It'd be big in my neighborhood, that's for sure.
Well, it might and it might not. I mean, I'm anti-Trump hysteria. The newsletter is anti-hysteria. It's anti-freak out. It is, determined, mindful resistance.
Okay.
To the evil that Trump undeniably represents.
You're never going to make any money with that.
Exactly. It's so much easier to build up a big following by being part of the problem than part of the solution, Mickey. Have you noticed that? This haunts my career. This one principle haunts my career.
Okay. I can think of others.
Let's talk off camera. No, go ahead. Hit me. I'm ready. Go ahead.
No. I'm just giving you grief for missing the podcast revolution.
There is a certain irony in
a podcast
in our having started the first podcast and yet not being ranked among the
right. And then when everybody said pivot to video, you were already on video.
That was when we decided to pivot to audio. Was that bad timing?
No, I think that was good timing.
Actually, we were on audio all along. We were among the earliest podcasters in that sense. We were a podcast before there were podcast apps.
That's right.
I digress. This is getting self-involved. This is starting to sound like Donald Trump, like a Donald Trump press conference. Like, let's review my career highlights.
Basically, my attitude on Trump is so far so good. The big issue, I care about is immigration.
That's really? I didn't know you had views on immigration.
That remains to be seen. But
could we just stop and some people may need orientation here. That is for you. That is the reason to support Trump, right?
Correct. Although I'm sympathetic to his dissent from free trade orthodoxy as well. But look, his big appointments have been responsible. Gorsuch and the new Fed chair. When he came in, everybody was saying he's going to defy the Supreme Court. He's not going to recognize their authority. None of that has happened. He's slavishly obeyed court decisions that went against him. His economic policies seem to be working. That people are even coming around to the idea that the tax cuts, while I thought they were sort of meh, might actually be prompting corporations to do business in America because they pay a lower tax rate here relative to the rest of the world than they used to. So that's probably a good thing.
Should I stop you here or should I wait?
The downside would be, I guess, the EPA probably going too far in the deregulatory direction. And in deregulation, generally, I don't think I have a handle on whether that's gone awry. But and on immigration, he's made a big gamble he's canceled this program for kids who came into the country allegedly through no fault of their own, about either 800,000 to 2 million of them, and he's hoping to get some real reforms in exchange for that. That was a gamble that he initiated, and it remains to be seen if that turns out to be a winner for him. Go ahead, interrupt.
Well, just quickly on taxes. I mean, first of all, among the grievances that supposedly helped get him elected president were growing income inequality. I mean, maybe not put quite that way, but that was the fact, the economic fact that seems to have fueled support for Trump. And the tax cut, leave aside the corporate tax cut for a while, the tax cut would seem to exacerbate income inequality since it's a huge tax cut for the rich and a much more modest one for everybody else. As for the corporate tax itself, I mean, you can always, by cutting corporate taxes, I mean, you can always, cutting taxes is always politically popular. And cutting corporate taxes will always lead more companies to locate their business at home. The problem is fiscal responsibility. You just at some point, a responsible government does not just boundlessly cut taxes. At some point, things come home to roost. And the problem with the corporate tax thing is like it's a race to the bottom among nations right now. So pretty soon, none of them will be able to tax corporations at all. And that then becomes actually a non-zero-sum problem among nations, and maybe they should get together and do something about that. But in any event, the tax cut, this actually gets to something I want to talk about a little later after we talk about immigration, which is, well, maybe I'll say it now because I do want to talk about this. The one kind of surprise about his presidency is that there was some reason to believe he might be well left of where he has turned out to be. I mean, there was an interview with Steve Bannon in, it was part of a profile in Vanity Fair, and Bannon was saying, they were saying, well, Bannon argued to increase taxes on the rich and to regulate big companies more heavily and to get out of Afghanistan. And it reminded me that for all you knew, Trump was going to turn into much more of a left-wing populist than he has, right?
I've noticed a lot of people making that argument. You made a lot of points there.
Okay.
It seems to me, did he win because of inequality, or did he win because people at the bottom had been stagnant for a decade and they were falling out of society? And that the inequality is increasing because the rich are getting so much richer. But at the bottom, people are starting to rise too. Wages are starting to rise. And if that continues, I would say that's a huge achievement. And
okay, but wait, Mickey, surely you're not crediting Trump with that, are you?
That's basically the reason why I'm in it. So, so far, so good.
But you're not crediting Trump with that, are you?
Finally seeing a tight labor market at the bottom. Where
right, which was an inevitable. I mean, look, the trends in place during the Obama administration have continued economically. They're just straight trend lines. And eventually what happens is the unemployment rate gets low enough, as it has, as that trend line has continued, that wages start to rise. I mean, that's happened. I mean, you don't think this is a result of some kind of immigration initiative or something, do you?
Well, I think immigration has an effect on that, yes. And certainly if you read the pro-immigrant press, crops are rotting in the fields. Employers can't find workers because there are not enough immigrants. So they think it has a big effect on what employers face. And so, yes, I think immigration plays a role, number one. Number two, he hasn't screwed it up. So even if he inherited a hot economy from Obama, he hasn't destroyed it. And also, isn't there an argument that, the last 1% of unemployment is the hardest to win? I mean, it's easy to go from 8% unemployment to 4% unemployment, but going from 4% unemployment to 3% unemployment.
No, on the contrary. I mean, I would say this. He was very lucky to inherit not just a steadily upward trending job market and steadily growing economy, but very, very, very low inflation. And that's what allows him to do something like a big tax cut without fearing that then you're going to have to immediately start worrying about inflation. That's what typically complicates things once the labor market gets tight is you have to worry about inflation. The Fed may clamp down and so on. But you can keep the spigot open if you inherit inflation as low as it was when he came into office. Few presidents have been that lucky.
Correct. He inherited a very good economy from Obama. Thank you, Obama. I voted for Obama, remember?
You didn't talk like it, but you did vote for him, yes.
The point about inflation is important because that's why people worry less about deficits now. Because they don't seem to be producing inflation. And I think the consensus among economists has shifted. Maybe it's overshifted into why were we worrying so much about deficits anyway? Draconian measures to bring them down don't seem to have worked. Maybe we need to keep constantly goosing up the economy. I noticed lately from the news from Davos has been that people like Rogoff at Harvard are saying, no, we may actually be in for a rapid rise in interest rates that may cause the whole structure to collapse. And so the sort of payback that people like Mike Kinsley have been talking about, which is deficits are inevitably going to produce a spike in inflation, may actually happen. That could happen. But the point about the main beef with the Trump tax cuts are that they are, as you say, fiscally irresponsible. It remains to be seen if adding $1 trillion to a $24 trillion deficit is really terrible, or if the stimulative effects outweigh it.
Well,
the complaints of Democrats against the tax cut really were not that powerful. They weren't as powerful as.
I'm totally 100% against exacerbating income inequality. That's a serious complaint. You're not against that? You're in favor of it?
I wrote a book about this, Bob. My line is...
Oh, right. You are in favor of it.
No, my line is that what matters is social equality, not income inequality. And wages at the bottom, how much people at the bottom make, dramatically affects social equality. But whether Mark Zuckerberg has $1 billion or $3 billion doesn't matter that much for social equality. What's he going to do with it? Maybe one day he'll clone himself, so we'll all have Mark Zuckerberg as our neighbor, but there's a limit to how much he can translate his greater income into lording it over the rest of us.
Yeah, but it's not just him; it's people that are at the upper fifth percentile who are getting further and further away from the people in the middle.
Well, that happens, but the best thing you could do about that is to raise incomes at the bottom, not. And also,
well, you cannot exacerbate it for starters.
Have public institutions that treat people as equal. And my great hope was, as you know, the healthcare system. I think Medicare does do that. Medicare basically treats everybody equally. Unfortunately, Obamacare is a very tiered system where people at the bottom got shunted into Medicaid.
And how does Trump care work? How does Trump care work?
We don't know how Trump care works.
I think not at all is the answer. It doesn't
exist. We don't know
exist.
what Trump care is, but there's still and one of the hopes on the left, and my hope was that he would gravitate toward some sort of national health insurance system, and I think that may still be the outcome. We just don't know. I don't think.
You could be.
I think Obamacare is not sustainable the way it's currently going.
Well, no, I mean, he's systematically dismantling it. He's picking it apart. I mean, he's dismantling it without replacing it with anything.
I think it had big problems even without him dismantling it.
It had some, but he wants to heighten the contradictions, but doesn't so far have anything to replace it.
But the question is then what comes next? And I'm ready to go with Medicare for all. I think a lot of America is ready to go with Medicare for all. I don't think he cares that much ideologically that he would resist that. It'll probably happen after he's left office anyway.
Okay, so
he came into office with no troops. There's no Trump party. There's no cadre of Trump supporters, hundreds of thousands of them ready to march into office. That's one of the reasons the idea that he was a fascist is insane, because he doesn't have the troops to be a fascist. He's one guy. He hasn't even staffed up the government adequately. So he had to rely on the right wing of the Republican Party, who do have the troops. And he's produced a fairly conventional conservative agenda, in part because of that. That's one of his great failings. He hasn't brought his people in. He hasn't even tried to attempt to figure out who his people were. Yeah, I think you're right. But I think ultimately he may break with them. On my issue, they've come around.
I'm right that he has not been as nearly as left-wing as he well might have been?
Yes. Or as Bannon wanted him to be. It's weird. I was at a dinner that a cabinet official was at, and somebody said, "Why don't you eliminate the carried interest loophole?" And he said, "Oh, I think that'll happen at the end. At the very end, we'll eliminate the carried interest loophole."
Who said that?
I'm an administration official. I can say no more. Trump made an effort to do that apparently at the last minute, but it was completely unavailing. The congressional Republicans just would not budge. So Trump was sort of a wimp on that. He was impotent. He tried, and they all said no, and he had to meekly go back in his hole. But he did try. So he had some of the right instincts, and he knows what a scam the carried interest loophole is. So I don't think hope is lost there.
Okay, I'm gonna get back to that left versus right Trump, but maybe we should talk a little more about immigration because it's the issue of the day.
It's the only thing I know anything about, and it is the issue of the day. So,
and first of all, let me remind people your main reason to support immigration restriction is out of concern for the downward pressure it puts on wages, that immigration puts on wages. But you did used to have this revanchist, I rarely get to use that word, this fear about revanchism, right?
Is revanchism different than irredentism?
I get them all mixed up. What I mean is, didn't you used to fear that like Mexico was going to seize California or something?
No, the fear was that there'd be so many Mexicans in the southern part of the southern states in the West that they might decide, hey, we just as soon be part of Mexico, and they wouldn't succeed, but there would be a movement in that direction. And there already is some movement. I mean, people are dual voting. Mexican politicians campaign in California. There's a little movement, so it's not a crazy worry.
There's also a Trump secessionist movement in California. You see this thing about they want to create a state out of the inland and rural areas and secede from the urban cosmopolitan part of California.
There are two secessionist movements in California. One is to actually, I forget. One is a left-wing movement and one is a right-wing movement. But and then there's a crazy Silicon Valley thing where you divide up the state into 6 sectors and you get 10 more senators in the bargain. It's like crazy.
That would be great.
Basically, I am for controlling immigration because I don't want low skilled workers coming in, flooding the market, and stopping wages from rising at the bottom. Mm-hmm. People at the bottom are in danger of dropping out of the meritocracy socially, not just economically. But if you read Charles Murray's book, there's a whole subculture forming there, and we want to bring them back.
His more recent book than his maybe most famously controversial book. What's the name of the book you're talking about?
I think it was called Coming Apart. I may be wrong. But that's the basic essence of it.
It was about the growing division between... it was not about race, unlike the other one. It was about the division between... Well, you tell me. You've read it.
But it analyzed only white America, and it said people at the bottom are forming a subculture where they don't get married, and there's all sorts of drug use and bad work habits, and it's scary, and I think it is. And Trump was a reaction to that. And so far, so good, as I say, because wages are rising at the bottom. Okay, so there's the economic grounds for opposing immigration, which is it provides wage competition that screws low-wage workers, who are the people who have been screwed the most over the recent decades. Then on the other side, on the right-hand side, there's the cultural complaint, which is their alien cultures, that they're peasant cultures that aren't quite as we want them to assimilate to us. We don't want us to assimilate to them.
Wait, what's the term peasant culture? I haven't heard that. What does that mean?
Coulter's book is that basically the people, and I think it's correct, that the people that came to the United States from Mexico were basically, as in every country in the world, former farmers move to the city as the economy grows.
This is an Ann Coulter term?
Peasant? It's a
No, I know peasant, but I mean, in this context, did you mention Ann Coulter, or did I misunderstand you?
I mentioned Ann Coulter. She talks about it. I don't think she's the only person who talks about it. Basically, people from the countryside move to the cities. The problem is the people from the Mexican countryside move to our cities instead of Mexico's cities. So that would be the argument that it will take longer for them to assimilate. They're great people. It will take longer for them to assimilate.
No, it's weird. I don't see
other people.
I don't know.
I don't quite know either, but
I don't see the big assimilation. They don't seem, the ones that I encounter, and there are a lot of them right where I live, Guatemalans in this case, they seem to be fitting in pretty readily.
I think they fit in pretty rapidly compared with other groups, but they're
right.
They are.
So why are we using this term peasant culture to single them out when they are actually not the most problematic immigrants in this?
Maybe
regard?
peasant culture isn't that different, but cultures differ. I think you wrote a whole book about that. So
actually, I didn't. But the reason I asked about Ann Coulter is it's exactly the kind of term she would use, knowing that it's provocative, knowing it's like. I'm questioning the analytical value of the term because I don't think that's why she's using it. She's using it because she knows it will set people like me off.
I think she uses worse terms than that, Bob.
Well, she does, but she's a master, and there are gradations.
Anyway, my point is there's a spectrum of complaints from economic to culture to outright racist that oppose immigration. The key group that is leading the fight to control immigration is a group called Numbers USA. They very self-consciously only care about the numbers. They don't care about what race people are. They don't care about what culture people come from. They just want to lower the number of immigrants to protect American workers. I'm sort of more to the right than them. I think there is a cultural component. I think it's crazy to think that all cultures are the same, that they all assimilate as rapidly. Some cultures believe in female genital mutilation. We want them to assimilate to us. We don't want us to assimilate to them. So we have to take that into account. That doesn't mean we don't want people from those cultures. It just means maybe we don't want 10 million people from those cultures. So basically what happened is there was this program for kids that came to the country when they were young, whether they were brought by their parents or not. They came under the age of 16. There was a bill in Congress called the DREAM Act that was going to amnesty them. It failed, and Obama decided to do it himself by executive order.
Right.
That was questionable constitutionally, but Trump continued it. But then some right-wing attorneys general sued to get it declared unconstitutional. Then Trump had a choice. He could let this suit continue, and maybe have it declared unconstitutional, or he could cancel the program himself and try to get the reinstatement of that program to trade it for some reforms he's always wanted. And that was the decision that was made. I had thought it was made by Numbers USA. It was not, because if you read the Washington Post this past 2 weeks, Steve Miller called them into his office and said to convince them to take this gamble.
You call him Steve? That's not a good sign.
Stephen. I've never met the man, but I met his parents. They're really nice. So the Trump administration somehow decided they want to take this gamble, which is go for an amnesty, agree to amnesty these so-called dreamers, but get something for it. And what they want is Trump wants the wall. They also want an end to the diversity lottery, which is 50,000 people who get picked by random from countries that don't normally immigrate. That's really not a major concern. The big issue is chain migration. Chain migration being when you come to this country, you get to bring your wife and kids. Everybody agrees that. But in 1965, they said you could also bring in your siblings, your brothers and sisters, and your adult children. And then once they're in, they can bring in their siblings and adult children. And it creates a sort of never-ending chain where entire villages can eventually move here. That doesn't happen if you just restrict it to the wife and kids. So as part of the shift from unskilled to skilled immigration, they want to cut down this chain category, which I assume is relatively unskilled compared with the employment-based categories, and they want to shift the employment-based categories to a pure merit system, and they have a crazy point system that looks like an SAT, where like we let in the most qualified STEM graduates from foreign countries. So it's basically, to my mind, a way to reduce unskilled immigration, shift it to more skilled, which is good because it protects the people at the bottom. That's the big ask. They also have some other things they want to get out of it.
So wait, the big ask, that was an unusually narrative way for you to present things.
Well, that's
so
how
let's just boil it down here. The big ask is in so-called chain migration. And I assume DACA itself, it's not so as important to end DACA from Trump's point of view as to end so-called chain migration, right?
Trump likes DACA. That's the other thing.
Well, he likes things other people like. I mean, he doesn't.
Jared Kushner and Ivanka have convinced him that the Dreamers are great people.
Anyway, that's not a.
He's never showed a desire to end DACA.
Right.
Maybe
he can live with DACA. You can live with DACA if chain migration ends.
That's his bargaining position.
Well, is it your view? Yes. Is it your view?
Yes. There's now a spectrum. Numbers USA has bought into this deal. They are willing to have DACA if they get an end to chain migration, basically.
And remind us, so Numbers USA is what, a very powerful pressure group or what?
Numbers, yes. A very powerful pressure group.
So he listens to what they say?
No. Well, they're experts. You should listen to what they say. They've been very successful lobbying Congress. They have the massive phone banks. Every time immigration comes up, they flood Congress with phone calls. I think they have 3 million members who bombard Congress.
So it's an interest group. It's an interest group. They lobby, in effect.
But they're an ideological interest group. There's no specific constituency they represent. They're powerful. All these people started as environmentalist groups. Okay, it all comes from zero population growth. They don't want the country flooded with people. One of the factors flooding the country with people is immigration. So they start off questioning immigration. They have now shifted.
Wait, they started as zero population growth people?
If you scratch restrictionists long enough, eventually you come to zero population.
I'm skeptical, but we'll leave that aside. Even if the lineage of this particular group leads there, I'm skeptical that is the kind of ultimate motivation of all the people who are pushing for immigration.
No, I didn't say it's the ultimate. I said it's the ultimate origin of the most important
of a particular group that may have changed in character in the meanwhile. Lineages don't tend to mean much.
You said they were an interest group. I'm trying to explain.
Okay.
Okay.
So
why are you so skeptical?
Well, it just seems like a way of sanitizing them. Oh, they're just environmentally, they're concerned about the environment.
It doesn't sanitize them because people think ZPG is crazy.
Well, it is, but it's kind of right-minded crazy from the point of view of some people on the left.
Well, if robots are going to replace all our labor, maybe ZPG and even worse, more stringent forms of population control.
I don't want to get into a ZPG argument.
Anyway, they're a very powerful interest group. They've bought in. Ann Coulter, another another restrictionist, has not bought in. She doesn't want any amnesty at all.
Not even for DACA?
She's not willing to trade DACA for...
Jeez, that's hardcore, man.
Well, she thinks any DACA will be expanded by the courts to include millions and millions of people, which is possible. And the second argument is that the DACA will happen and the reforms won't happen.
You mean DACA would be expanded to include millions of people who are already here? So we couldn't round them up and expel them as she would like.
People do come over the border and then say, hey, I came 10 years ago, so they qualify too. And any amnesty has an incentive effect because people think, well, they amnestied the Dreamers that were here before, so they'll amnesty the next generation of Dreamers too. So it's not quite as cut and dried as that. I'm in between Numbers USA and Ann Coulter. I mean, and if the deal gets worse and worse, Numbers USA may bail too. They may decide that it's not worth giving the Dreamers.
Well, I have good news. We already have a compromise, Mickey. Have you read the statement from the press secretary today?
What did she say?
It says, President Donald J. Trump and his administration have hosted dozens of meetings with Republican and Democratic leadership and rank-and-file members of the House and Senate to discuss these reforms and find a bipartisan path forward. This is all about immigration. Based on these negotiations, the White House will release a legislative framework on Monday that represents a compromise that members of both parties can support. Oh, thanks. Now they don't have to negotiate. One side gets to tell us what the compromise is. Anyway, that'll probably include DACA. And then everything Trump wants on border wall, chain migration, lottery, right?
Bob, people have been complaining that the president hasn't given enough leadership. He doesn't say what he wants. Now you're complaining that he's going to say what he wants.
No, he can say what he wants. He just shouldn't call it a compromise. That's kind of stupid.
What he wants.
It's kind of stupid to call it a compromise when you are one of two parties, or three parties or whatever. Compromise emerges. No one side announces it in advance. That's silly.
He's announcing what his position is. People are saying, give us the parameters of what you'll accept.
You're exactly right. He's announcing what his position is.
Announcing these parameters, and I think they'll probably be pretty tilted in the Steve Miller direction.
Right. That's my point.
Basically, here's another way to think of it, okay? Current immigration is 1 million a year, okay? The so-called...
Total, everyone... You mean legal immigration?
Legal immigration, right. The debate has shifted from ways to stop illegal immigration, chain migration is legal immigration, to ways to lower legal immigration, okay? And polls show that Americans basically want immigration a bit lower than it is now. Right now it's 1 million. The Gang of Eight that failed under Bush and Obama would have boosted it to 2 million. Ann Coulter wants 0. Maybe even less than 0, but 0.
Yeah, she does want less than 0.
Maybe she wants
to round people up.
But 0. The Numbers USA position is cut that to like 600,000, maybe 650,000 by eliminating chain migration. The obvious sweet spot that will produce a compromise is 800, 850,000. Lower it by a bit, lower it by a significant enough number, 100,000 or more, so that Trump could claim a victory. It'd be a huge thing if immigration was actually reduced for once. You can always raise it in the future, and then you can amnesty the DACAs, and you have a compromise.
Okay.
That's Mickey's prediction for the sweet spot. They
may not reach your prediction of the deal that emerges and gets passed, or your prediction for what Trump proposes, or what?
The deal that would get Trump and Numbers USA on board. It's a big lift for the Democrats because they have grown, and Lindsey Graham have grown up thinking they're entitled to this massive increase to 2 million and this amnesty for everybody, and the ruling class was going to ram this through the Congress.
Okay, so summarize again. The deal that would work for...
So they're having to climb down from that, and it's going to take a while.
Okay, so the deal that would work for Trump, again, is... do all the dimensions. What kind of wall are we? What about how much money for a wall? How much of it is fence? What is that?
There'll be a bunch of money for a wall, and it'll be a wall. Schumer's already conceded that.
But he took that off the table. He's taken that off the table.
What does that mean, taking that off the table? Before it was the end of the world if we built the wall. Then he comes and says, okay, it's not the end of the world. Now he's going to go back and say it's the end of the world? No, he's already given that up.
No, it's not that he's given it up. Let me tell you I want to work in a grievance against the New York Times reporting for a second. I think what he said was, look, I offered a specific amount of money for a wall to Trump if we could do this deal and keep the government from shutting down with this deal. Trump didn't take the deal. So it's back to square one. He can't assume anything about what I will give in the next round of negotiations. Now, that's just standard procedure. If you offer a deal, the guy says no, well, then you're back to square. You can't assume, if he says, I will do this if you do this, and the person says, well, I won't do this, then you get to say, well, then I won't do this. That's just the way it works. And I just want to say, the New York Times, when they reported this, they used the phrase, Schumer's decision to renege. Now, that's not reneging. And it's just... The New York Times has started injecting so much attitude in their straight reporting. That is not reneging. And, you know, originally all the attitude was anti-Trump, but I think increasingly it's just symmetrically out of control. And I have to say, I am more and more reading the Wall Street Journal, as abhorrent as I find the opinion page. The straight news reporting in the Wall Street Journal preserves some of what I always thought straight reporting was supposed to be, which is just try to preserve a dispassionate stance and explain what happened, and don't work in all these damn judgments. So there, I've said that.
You're certainly right about the New York Times.
It really is bad.
Trump, but they have been. They're much more confidently judgmental in annoying ways.
And you know, their headline was kind of the, you know, removed any doubt as to what Schumer was going to have to do almost. I mean, they reported, you know, when their headline was like, Democrats shut down government.
Well, Democrats did shut down the government. That was the accurate.
No, you could argue it. I mean, here's the deal.
There was a vote. The Republicans voted to keep it open. The Democrats voted to shut it down.
Can I finish? The Republicans knew what they could do to keep the government open. The Democrats knew what they could do to keep the government open. Neither one wanted to do what they could have done. The Republicans could have included DACA. The Democrats could have accepted no DACA. Now, as it happens, because the Republicans have the 50 votes to introduce legislation, but it requires 60 to pass, the Republicans got to go first. Okay, fine. So the Democrats were the ones who had to be the last to declare, or maybe the first in a sense to declare, that they wouldn't do the deal. But whether that, given what I've just said, whether that justifies saying the Democrats shut down the government is a call that certainly other newspapers were not willing to make. The Post didn't report it that way, Journal and so on. Anyway, it's let me just say, if nothing else, it's interesting that the New York Times, which has taken so much heat from Trump and his friends, really did Trump a solid at that one moment. I mean, that was the worst thing Schumer could have possibly hoped for to come from the New York Times at that moment.
The Democrats themselves boast that they shut down the government. Paul Begala was on TV the other day saying they were talking about the Hispanic vote, and he goes, "We just shut down the government for them."
Well, Paul Begala's not in Congress. I mean, as you know, Mickey, the bargaining.
This is the first time you've made a crazy left-wing complaint. I mean, the New York Times was basically describing what had happened, the status quo. Do we continue?
No, you're not detaching yourself enough from the kind of arbitrary sequence of declaration. The Democrats had to declare first, just by way of the logic of the legislative flow. The Democrats were in the position of having to declare first that what they could do to keep the government open, they weren't going to do. And so, you know, but the fact is, both the Republicans and the Democrats knew what they could have done to keep the government open. They both said they weren't going to do it.
The question is, do you consider the baseline status quo? The baseline status quo, do you continue it or not? The baseline status quo did not include DACA. So it's the Democrats who are introducing an extraneous element there. We're going to continue unless you do this. The Republicans said, let's just continue this, and we'll debate DACA. And
yeah, but the Republicans had accepted, had abandoned the principle of baseline status quo. They had included CHIP in the legislation, which was a tactical masterstroke, I concede.
That's something Democrats wanted.
I know. That's why it was a tactical masterstroke.
So
because that meant that the Democrats could no longer say we demand CHIP as well. And then it was like, oh, well, this is just for one interest group, right? This is just for Latinos. And that put them in that position, and they were toast.
It's weird. I had a thought experiment, which was suppose the Democrats had included DACA instead of CHIP in the deal and said, oh, but we refuse to go along with CHIP. Is there any chance the Democrats would have shut down the government, having gotten DACA, because they were holding out for CHIP? No, they would not. I don't know, but
the Republicans couldn't have done that. That would have been too nakedly Machiavellian.
It was legitimately revealing that there was no way the Democrats were going to do anything that the DACA recipients didn't want. They would not. The DACA recipients.
Well, they wound up doing that. They actually wound up doing something that took the heat from them. They actually did wind up doing what you just said they wouldn't do. They caved.
What do you mean?
The Democrats did do what DACA's people did not want them to do, which is they caved and got virtually nothing in return.
Well, right, because they failed because all their senatorial candidates in moderate and red states were terrified that they were going to lose because the entire Democratic Party was being run by 850,000 to 3 million illegal immigrants. That was not.
Right, I'm just saying they did cave.
They wanted to make so even though they wanted to go one way, they lost.
Well, it depends who they is. The people, Chuck Schumer may have wanted to, but in the end, the party caved.
Right, because they were defeated.
So let me just say, you've talked a lot about why you love immigration. Let me, and that you think Trump has been a good president this year. I could go on all day about how horrible I think he's been. I mean, all the stuff about eroding norms is true. Foreign policy alone is a burgeoning disaster nobody's even talking about because he's so good at distracting us. They just announced like a permanent, long-term military presence in Syria. And because they failed to give a heads up to Turkey, Turkey responded by invading Syria. And nobody's even talking about this. It's such a blunder. And it's so the opposite of what he claimed he would be as president. One thing Bannon said in that aforementioned interview is, well, I would pull our troops out of Afghanistan and use the money to build infrastructure. Well, Trump, it's like he's all in everywhere. We're going to be in Syria now for forever. And again, they did it so stupidly that now there's a whole new war in Syria. And nobody's even talking about this, but leave all that alone. And all the other areas, and just the fact that he's such a horrible human being to just be like everything a president's supposed to be, including like a role model for kids and everything else. He's just horrible. Leave that alone. On immigration itself, I don't know of many pure open borders people in the sense that, our borders should literally be open. I'm fine with restrictions on the amount of legal immigration. I'm fine with enforcing immigration at the borders. What I'm not fine with, the irony is that what Trump is doing is actually less humane than the wall that has taken so much heat. And I accept, I also don't like the idea of the wall, partly because what a horrible metaphor it is, partly because what a waste of money it is. It's not the most efficient way to do border control. But let me just say what's I think so horrible about what he has done is rather than just actually secure the border, he's making millions of people who came to America with the implicit understanding that coming here as an undocumented worker was no big deal. You can line up in front of Home Depot and go to work every day and everybody knows you're an illegal immigrant. Nobody's going to say a thing. People who came here under those circumstances, and he's making them live in fear. That's how he is reducing the inflow, which wasn't that high actually when he took president, but the inflow of illegal immigration. And I just want to give you, I'm not that big on anecdotes, but one thing, one of my daughters has been traveling around the country a lot, and she was on a Greyhound bus. I don't know what part of the country this was in. And I don't know if it was a cop or a sheriff or an ICE agent or what, but some officer of the law boarded the bus at some stop and said, are there any people on board who aren't U.S. citizens? And apparently he actually went down. I think he actually looked at IDs. Margaret wound up showing him her ID. And he found one guy, Latino, who I guess was not a U.S. citizen, took him off the bus. And after that, he got off the bus, and some Latino woman who had not known him at all, she wasn't with him, she called somebody on her cell phone and was talking in Spanish about what had happened and started crying. And who knows? She probably had family who were here illegally or friends. I don't think she was. So that was just one little thing. I assume that's the kind of thing that happened either very little or not at all before Trump, and is happening more now. And that is, but in any event, that is the basic means of enforcement under Trump, is to take all these people, tons of people, and make them suddenly live in fear. And so this woman, this was like a real woman crying. And I just want to be clear, what happened on the bus is fine with you, right? This is happening on a large scale. That's fine with you. You think it's a good thing.
I think there's always a danger with a police organization like ICE that they will get out of control, and there are a couple of instances that are troubling. Keep in mind, first, I would completely reject your idea that people came here knowing it was fine. Everybody knew it was illegal.
Well, they knew it was technically illegal.
There were helicopters whirring over. We've had this argument before. You have this completely bogus idea that, oh, we said, come on in, it's all fine, and then we lowered the boom. No, we said it's illegal. They came anyway.
Exactly what I said was the case. It's like if you do 70 in a 65-mile zone and a cop pulls you over, you're pretty surprised because 70 is supposed to be okay in a 65-mile zone.
This isn't 70. This is going 90 in a 60-mile-hour zone. Well, and when that happens,
my point is, given the fact that you could line up at Home Depot every day, and you're sitting there in Mexico, and the guy says, "Look, yes, there is this law." Just like there's the drug laws that everybody in our generation has violated, right? I mean, that's a good question. Should everyone who's ever smoked marijuana be suddenly put in jail? That would be your friends. Would that be okay? They knew it was illegal. Is that okay if we round them up?
I'll think about that one.
Yeah, do. But anyway, this is happening, and this is just...
My argument would be there shouldn't be a law against marijuana, but there should be a law against illegal immigration. So
but Mickey, their view when they came over may have been that there shouldn't be a law, but there was a law, and there is a law against marijuana, and that's just the deal. That's not a very good counter argument.
Part of the problem is that people in Mexico don't think the U.S. has any right to enforce its border. In part, that's because of peculiar historical circumstances where we won a large part of the Southwest from Mexico in a military campaign. And there's this, I think there's a myth or maybe it's not a myth, in Mexican history books that the settlement of that dispute involved Mexicans having special rights to immigrate to the United States. So it wasn't that you get this constantly when you talk to dreamers, is that they don't think we have any right to enforce our border. And the purpose of the wall, the reason the symbolism is good, is because it sends the message, no, we have a right to enforce our border. So
how many dreamers have you talked to? You get this constantly.
I'm constantly debating with them online. And eventually you get to this point where they just don't understand.
Well, I wouldn't assume, Mickey, assume that the ones who are online debating are representative of dreamers broadly. That would seem to be almost certainly not the case.
Right, but there was a very good poll by the Pew organization, which is the one organization that people on the left and the right seem to think is reputable. And it was a poll in Mexico done by a guy who is for amnesty, a reputable demographer. And it found that a majority of Mexicans who were in Mexico, not just the ones that wanted to immigrate, think that Mexicans have a right to come to this country. So that's as scientific as you're ever going to get, Bob. It's not just anecdotal. I think I'm right on that one. But anyway,
even those aren't the dreamers, strictly speaking. But fine. I mean, but what relevance does that have?
The dreamers would be 90%. We have a right to come to America. The Mexicans are only 55%.
Well, we don't know. But back to my question: the scene I described on that bus. You think that's good, right? Because that's what Trump is doing.
I don't think
good. You're glad it happened.
He's been forced to use interior enforcement to try to stem the tide of illegal immigration.
And you think he should or he shouldn't?
He's been denied.
You're in favor of it or you're opposed?
He's been denied the prophylactic tools, which are the wall and E-Verify. So when he gets those prophylactic tools that prevent only future illegal immigration, then you don't need the sort of shock and awe techniques that ICE is using in their current population.
But you're in favor of them? But you're in favor of them now, or you are opposed? Or you have no view?
What's your point?
I'm asking you the question. Are you in favor of the tactics I just described, or opposed?
I'm probably against going through buses and asking everybody for their papers. I am not against illegal immigrants who have been living in this country for 20 years but commit any kind of crime being deported. That's one of the deal with illegal immigration. So I'm
but it's going a lot. It's going a lot further than that.
Enforcement against illegals that other people would find oh, that's too much. But I agree that ICE could possibly, and probably has, gotten a bit out of control. But in general, they needed some firming up. My point is that if you get the wall and you get E-Verify, then you don't need as draconian ICE enforcement to prevent future illegal immigration. The other point is Trump specifically focused on chain migration, which is not illegal immigration at all, because that does not threaten the existing illegal population. The existing illegal population cares most about, do you fund more ICE agents? That's what terrifies them. Okay? Trump's saying, okay, we don't want that, but give us this chain migration thing, which is prophylactic, which protects low-wage workers, including you, by the way, and that's a big achievement. And that doesn't really affect you that much, just as the wall doesn't really affect you that much. So there is a logic to Trump's demands that completely fit with your objection.
Okay, I'm just curious, these things that you would say are excesses on the part of ICE agents, do you ever point those out on Twitter and say, this is going too far, this is inhumane?
No.
Because, well, I would encourage it, but, I really think, you can say that there are the occasional excesses, but I think this is an important part of the strategy, is to make people live in fear. Because, the truth is, if all you say is if you commit a crime, we'll send you out of the country, that's not going to make many people live in fear. That's actually not going to discourage illegal immigration very much, probably. He wants to go further than that. He is going further than that. And ICE knows they have his support when they do things like this, which, to be honest, just the first thing, I guess I don't want to get hysterical, but when my daughter told me the story, I just thought of like Germany in the 30s. It's just creepy.
It's similar to Germany in the 30s. Yes, my grandmother had to forge papers so that when they came through on the train asking for papers, she was trying to get out of the country, that she could con whatever the Nazi officer, German officer was who was checking for papers. So yes, it's very Germanic and un-American. But we're going to have to do some things that are a little un-American. Even you would concede.
I do. Wait.
Sure, you have argued, I think, that in order to fight terrorism, we will have to give up some of our privacy rights, haven't you? I remember you arguing.
The drift of my argument is that the only reason we think of there being this trade-off between security and privacy is because we don't think about the third dimension, which is how many people in the world hate America. If we would focus on reducing that, we could have security and privacy. So no, I haven't. Obviously, you can dream up some scenario where I would go, yeah, I guess they had to tap somebody's phone in that case, obviously. But no, the drift of my critique has been that our foreign policy and people like Donald Trump. And thank you for reminding me. One of the worst things he has done in terms of our national security and in terms of the sacrifices of privacy that we will now be asked to make is make so many people in the world hate us. Just the shithole comment alone. The guy is just a horror show. He's just a horror show.
Here's, I guess, what I meant. Part of America has always been, to me, worst comes to worst, you can take your car and drive into to the desert, and nobody will be able to find you, and you'll be able to just hang around in the desert as an unknown, off the grid, without the authorities knowing where you are. That part of America is going to necessarily be circumscribed if we're going to fight terror, because you can't just let people go into the desert and hide. Plus, if you've driven across the country a lot, you know that the places to hide are getting fewer and fewer because civilization has and tracking devices and cell phones and everything has made the country much smaller. And
technology has made escape almost impossible.
The true frontier doesn't exist anymore. So that's what I meant. That what we thought of as America is changing, just the way it changed when the frontier closed, right? Anyway, so we don't know who's going to win this big gamble. the other wrinkle which listeners should know about is it's going to go on for a while because first the Democrats have to somehow get out of this framework, which they're entitled to only talk about chain migration when we're talking about amnestying all 11 million or more people, and get into the Trump's demand, which is no, we talk about it now in exchange for only amnestying 1 to 2 million people. And so that the Democrats, and they have this activist base that is wagging the Democratic dog, and it's going to take a while for them to lose, and get an attitude adjustment. The second thing is there is no real deadline. People are talking as if on March 5th, DACA ends and Dreamers are going to be deported. No, a court has ordered them to renew taking Dreamer applications. And the Trump administration has shockingly complied with that. Shocking, not just because they're obeying the law, which they always have done, but because they didn't ask for a stay of that crazy left-wing judge's ruling. So they're letting that DACA is going on and on beyond March 5th. They're going to appeal it, but that takes months, probably years. So for years, DACA is going to go on. There is no deadline.
So you're assuming that the Democrats will again back down when the next government shutdown deadline approaches, which is in a few weeks. You're saying this isn't going to get wrapped up by then, and
correct. I think it'll get wrapped up, if it gets wrapped up, closer to the election, when the Democrats realize, A, we haven't delivered anything for the Dreamers, and they're still pissed off, and nothing's happening to them, but they're anxious, and their activists want a permanent fix, and 2, we do not want to go to the American electorate the way we did last week and say that the most important issue in the country is whether this subset of illegal immigrants gets amnestied. Corporate America thinks it's important. The media thinks it's important. Voters do not think it's important and think Democrats are insane to be giving it so much promise.
So you think immigration legislation is going to be decoupled from the shutdown issue completely?
Correct.
You do?
Yeah, and the Democrats are going to want to put this to bed, but that's going to take months and months and months.
Well, see, here's a kind of related question. Like, if Trump, does Trump want to declare victory on immigration? You know what I mean? It's like, does he want to say, okay, I got everything I want? Let's imagine they come to a deal and Trump says, I'm happy with this. Wouldn't he almost rather have the issue, given the nature of his base, than to say, well, okay, that one's solved. I can't get you riled up about immigration anymore because now it's, we've got the policies I want. Does he really want that?
That's a good question. Politicians are traditionally punished for achieving their ends. So the Democrats achieve the New Deal and they're immediately punished because voters don't need them anymore. They have the New Deal. That's arguably what happened, toward the end of the 20th century. So, it's an interesting question. I bet there's, there will be enough left that he could, make an issue. But if he succeeds in everything, he's in trouble maybe because people don't like him.
And that's why,
they don't want his example. Voters are using him to achieve the ends they want. And if he achieves them all, he's dead. Yeah, you're right.
Well, and that's why when Schumer first said, okay, I told him whatever you want for the wall, fine. At first I was surprised, but then I thought, in a way the Democrats would like to have this issue off the table.
Well, this brings a larger point that I wanted to bring up because I think you may think it's insane, which is if only the globalists caved on immigration the way Schumer caved on the wall and said, let's get this issue off the table. Immigration has been destroying the globalist movement. Globalist leaders throughout the world, including Angela Merkel, have been badly damaged by resistance to immigration and refugees that had been previously part of the globalist catechism. The only person who survived was Macron, and Macron in France has been cracking down on immigration. So even he is the exception that proves the rule, as they say. And just give up on, and Fareed Zakaria suggested it, and Walter Russell Mead suggested it. Give up on immigration, and then you can do the rest of the globalist agenda. You can have world government. You can have the gradual integration of countries. You can have maybe even free trade, but just don't ask nations to accept people they don't want. That seems to be a logical move for globalists now gathered at Davos to make.
Well, first of all, I mean, globalism per se does not imply open borders. I mean, as it happens, the European Union has very liberal internal borders. I would say the Davos, the elite at Davos are closer, just as a matter of generic ideology, to being in favor of free trade than being in favor of unrestricted immigration. And the answer to your question would isn't globalization and its advocates aren't they totally off the hook if you just start legitimizing immigration restriction? The answer is no. I mean, free trade is itself a very controversial thing because the same people in America and European countries and so on who think that their wages are being held down by immigration think that their wages are being held down by trade. So
do I, but I'd say it would get them off the hook enough. That's my only argument. It would help get them at least partway off the hook, and they need to be gotten partway off the hook because they're losing election after election, and the whole thing is about to crumble. I do think most definitions of globalism imply that not that we have a borderless world, although some people say that, but that we have massive refugee flows. People have to adjust. Countries, people have to be freer to move from country to country. And that is part of the ideology of globalism. And you're right, it's not a very important part. That's why I think they should throw it overboard. That's great. If they never believe that.
Yeah, no, it's a very big and divisive issue in Europe and the U.S. Yeah. And it would take the heat off some politicians who are identified like globalists if they weren't so closely associated with relatively liberal immigration. Yeah, I agree.
Right. I think that's Macron's strategy.
Right. And he's showing you that in a way you can have it both ways. He's still a globalist in sensibility and in policy in many ways, but
that doesn't bother me.
What?
That doesn't bother me. I also think you need enough restrictions on trade so that people at the bottom in whatever society you are make enough money to be part of society.
Well, but this leads to my hobby horse, which is, there's two things. Let me back into the more global point. First of all, my preferred way, if you ask me, well, let me actually start from the front end of the thing. I think the fact that Trump chose not to go left-wing in the end, at least so far, he's not a left-wing populist, to the extent that Steve Bannon might have wanted him to be, has kept us from contemplating kind of the depth of the challenge he represents. Because I think the challenge he represents is the globalization and globalism versus nationalism challenge. And I think it's significant. And it cuts in principle. It's a challenge in principle to both parties, to the left and to the right. Because the Democrats and the Republicans, because both of them have this combination of affluent cosmopolitans and lower income people, right? And that's in a way ironic. You would expect the party identified as the left to be just to have all like the low income people, and the one identified as the right to have all the affluent people, but it's not like that. And among the challenges globalization presents is like, what do you do about trade? And the Democratic Party is actually split on this, and we haven't had to confront that so far, because for one thing, Trump is only now starting to get aggressive on trade.
Right.
And he's levied these washing machine and solar panel tariffs. Up so far, the economic nationalism in that sense has been not part of his agenda. In the campaign it was, but it hasn't actually happened. Now it's starting to happen, and the left has to ask itself, well, how do we feel about this?
Right.
And my view is that what the left should do about the challenge of trade is address it at the level of international governance. I mean, they should say, I mean, a lot of these trade agreements like NAFTA, they have these kind of token labor and environmental accords. And I think the left should say, no, we need to get serious. We need to say that if Mexico, that like if we're, if NAFTA is going to stay as it is, Mexico's going to have to do more dramatic things on the labor and environmental front. Maybe I assume that the right to unionize is not guaranteed in Mexico now. I'm not sure, but that's the kind of thing that could be on the agenda. In principle, you could even say we want the minimum wage to be X in Mexico. Now, these are like radical sounding ideas, but I think if you actually reflect on what a basic challenge globalization does pose to the current structure of both parties, current coalition of both parties, they're going to have to entertain radical solutions. And
here's why I think that's total pie in the sky. I mean, people in Bangladesh are willing to work for, I don't know what, $1 a day?
Right.
The whole virtue of free trade is supposed to be that we take advantage of that and get the low labor costs. So
well, they don't raise their wages to what ours are.
They're going to be able to legislate a $10 a day minimum wage in a country where people are willing to work for $1 a day. It's just...
Well, you obviously wouldn't go from one... Look, two things.
It's actually, that you can have, like, by imposing...
I get your point. Two things. Actually, legislating a minimum wage is the most extreme example I can think of. But I don't think it will never happen. I don't think it's crazy to think that there won't be regional trade agreements that don't have that. I mean, in fact, the European Union is an example of how crazy... That's just a regional trade agreement. And look at all the stuff that was ultimately lobbed onto that. I mean, there probably is, for all I know, a European minimum wage. I don't know, but there's stuff that radical. So I don't think it's crazy to say this can't happen in the future. Obviously, if it was all about the minimum wage per se, you wouldn't go from $1 to 10, obviously. But there's other things short of that, like you have to you grant the right to unionize, or much more severe child labor laws, and XYZ. And for that matter, environmental regulations can raise the cost of production in a low-wage country in a way that alleviates pressure on American...
Why is that just as damaging to free trade as not having free trade?
No, it's not, Mickey.
You're destroying a lot of the value of free trade, which is precisely that you take advantage of low-wage labor. And if you don't take advantage of it...
Well, Mickey, you can say the same thing about a tariff.
At some point, it's going to put unskilled Americans out of work if other unskilled people can do the job more cheaply. So you need some restriction.
Mickey, it is the exact same idea as a tariff, okay? A tariff raises the cost of goods coming in, and that reduces the number of them that sell in the United States, and it reduces pressure on American workers.
Except that a tariff is simple and raises revenue, and yours is incredibly complicated and involves a meddlesome international bureaucracy that isn't going to be able to enforce it.
But it doesn't lead to a trade war. It doesn't lead to a trade war. What are you laughing at? It doesn't lead to a trade war. And the bureaucracies already exist. We have the WTO. We have NAFTA.
We only have an auto industry, Bob, because Reagan and Congress threatened the Japanese and said, you got to produce here. So the Japanese, there was a détente in this trade war where there's a norm, if you will, worked out, where the Japanese said, okay, we're not going to push our advantage too much. We're going to build cars in America. And everybody's happy with that. It was the result of a threatened trade war, and that resulted in a settlement. It didn't involve minimum wage laws. It didn't involve an international bureaucracy. It involved basically a political accommodation, realistic political accommodation by people who could have had a trade war and decided not to.
Right. So, and sometimes they decide to, and sometimes they decide not to. But my main point is, look, you're acting as if the proposal is to raise the minimum wage everywhere to what it is in the U.S. That would be the equivalent of opposing a 7,000% tariff. No, that's not the proposal. Both tariffs and the international governance approach can be incremental, or they can be massive. That's not what distinguishes them. So the idea that one would wipe out trade and one wouldn't, no. I mean, both of them can wipe out trade or cannot.
I just think it's a cumbersome bureaucratic way to restrict trade that you like because it leads to global governance. as opposed to the simple nationalistic way to restrict trade, which is every country imposes a tariff and you work it out. There's no country in the world that's going to give up its auto industry.
So what about environmental problems? What's wrong with using a trade body to say, if you're going to enjoy the benefits of trade, you have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to X, Y, or Z? That seems
that's a separate issue, and sure, but the reason for that is not.
Yeah, but that has a cumbersome bureaucracy.
Yeah, well, but you probably need a cumbersome bureaucracy to protect the environment. That doesn't bother me. But don't. I don't understand why you're in part restricting the benefits of trade, as you admit, when you do that. So what? So I have no problem if pursuing environmental goals restricts trade, the same way tariffs does.
Okay,
but it does it. It achieves.
So you support the tariffs Trump has levied?
I haven't thought about it.
Okay. Well, the quick summary is, they hurt some workers, help some workers, hurt some consumers, help no consumers. In the case of solar panels, the people who the whole industry of installing solar panels is hurt. That's the.
But there are. I guess the argument is we were in danger of losing this entire industry of the future to China, and we don't want to do that. And there are, there are reasons why you want to preserve industries of the future in your country that are not taken into account by free trade theory, as I believe Andy Grove made that case at Intel, which is we want to maintain leadership in chip making even if it requires violations of free trade. So,
well, that is the hope. I mean, I think the hope is to strong arm people into building factories here.
And achieving the network effects of having all the experts in solar panels having a center in the United States that can at least compete with the world. The big debate about that is, I think, involves artificial intelligence now, where we think we're losing our advantage to the Chinese too.
Okay.
Isn't it possible, Bob, that China looks like it's going to take over the world? Aren't they cruising for a bruising in terms of their system of political control can't possibly survive for 4 more decades?
Well, I'd be surprised if it did. But I think, one interesting thing that people miss about China is, they say everyone was wrong. It turned out that this information technology was not going to be the death of the Communist Party. Well, it hasn't been. It has been the death of communism, but it's true that a party that is called the Communist Party is still, autocratically ruling. But there is in China, there's a kind of a pluralism. There's a kind of citizens get together and agitate for things in a way. I haven't checked into this lately, but they have used information technology to do that, to get together and protest about local environmental problems or whatever their grievances are. And the government is often responsive. So it's not at all a democracy. But I think in terms of how responsive the government is to actual citizen grievances, I'm not sure you couldn't make the case that has increased as a result of information technology. That's all I have to say about it.
So in that sense, information technology has made the system more resilient and sustainable because they have to be more responsive. Therefore, the Communist Party can maintain.
The system has proved resilient. But again, what I would say, if you wanted to defend information technology, is that it has created a situation where the only way the Communist Party can stay in power is to become more responsive to citizen grievances than it had been. Now, that's a conjecture. That's a hypothesis. I don't follow it closely. But
I thought the thesis of Nonzero was that if they're going to continue to pursue human progress, they're going to have to become more democratic.
Well,
there was teleological. There was some kind of pull in that direction.
No, I mean the argument wasn't that information technology inexorably makes people more democratic, but it was, and China may pose a challenge to this claim. It was that in the long run, there's a connection between, that if a country wants to be prosperous in the information age, it has to grant more. It has to distribute political power more broadly. It has to decentralize politically. So, I mean, that's why I talked about political pluralism as opposed to democracy per se, because more political pluralism would be an example of what I'm talking about. That would be a way for me to kind of salvage my thesis. But if that's wrong, then in the short run, at least, my thesis has not been salvaged.
Oh.
And we don't want that.
Stick to your thesis. Undemocratic pluralism is very depressing.
Yeah, but look at America. It's nominally a democracy. It's a complete mess.
I'm a formalist. I like democracy even if it produces a complete mess. I
mean, look at Congress. This is a mess.
It's not a mess. We're working it out. People say it's a mess because they didn't pass immigration reform. They didn't pass immigration reform because we didn't want to pass immigration reform. The voters didn't want it, and it was a good thing that it failed. That was the system working.
Well, in your view, yeah.
Now the system.
All I know is that when people start throwing the talking stick at each other, Mickey.
I don't get this talking. The talking stick is something. It's a symbol. It's a symbol that you have the floor. It's not an actual microphone. It's just a pure symbol.
It's a way of keeping people from interrupting. I mean, in case anybody didn't read these backgrounders, so this moderate group of senators, led by they were meeting, I guess, in Susan Collins' office, and apparently even among moderates in the Senate these days, this is how bad things are. You have to worry about people interrupting each other, leading to like fist fights or something. I don't know, to total disarray. So they had a talking stick. They said, when we hand you the talking stick, you can talk and no one else can. But somebody interrupted somebody, and so they threw the talking stick at them. I mean, I don't know. So they had to go to a basketball, something that couldn't put an eye out.
Something like, and apparently this is also on the sitcom Veep. So, anyway, we need a talking stick, Bob.
I was pretty good about not interrupting you for the most part, except when I got a little emotive about the Greyhound bus thing, but rightly so. That's disgusting.
In general, the problem with this format is it's not easy to interrupt. Even though we don't. I think we can hear each other when we're talking, so we don't no longer have to like wait until the other person is finished. But in general, I'm in favor of more interruption rather than less. I didn't deploy my prop. I have a prop.
Oh, good.
Which is that Schumer claimed that Trump had bargaining with Trump was like negotiating with Jell-O, and Trump's Jell-O technique is working, Bob.
Wait, you're showing us a box of Jell-O. I say that for the benefit of audio podcast listeners. Is that that's your clever prop to show us a Jell-O?
I'm afraid that's all I got today.
Wow, you could have at least made the Jell-O. You could have at least prepared the Jell-O. It's just a box of powder.
The Jell-O
he didn't say it's like negotiating with a box of powder. He was talking about Jell-O.
By the way, have you read the best detail of the Stormy Daniels article?
Now we're talking. Now we're going to get some traffic. Bring it on.
Where Trump, in the middle of seducing this porn star, starts singing about how he has the hotel staff make a pizza with little pizzas on top of it. He starts singing about how he's going to have a pizza with little pizzas on top of it.
I missed that. It's a riveting detail, and thank you for sharing that with us, Mickey.
It's fantastic. it's much better than Don Riegel's seduction technique, which is, honey, I have a super love for you. And by the way, the newsletter goes out in the morning. that was
speaking of newsletters, Mickey.
That was the more Washington technique.
Speaking of newsletters, everyone should subscribe to the Mindful Resistance newsletter.
Are you making money off this?
No, we're not charging.
Oh, okay. I assume you wouldn't pay expenses anyway. But
we have...
Okay. If you're not charging, I will sign up for it too.
Yeah, it's free. We have 5,500 subscribers, and we're only a few months old. Is that good? That's good. It's not easy. And when people give you their email address, it's not easy to get people to give you their email address.
That's pretty good. I've now completely succumbed to paywalls. I subscribed to the LA Times yesterday. So they've won.
I've only surrendered to 3 people. Washington Post, well, New York Times we get the physical version of, so we get the digital for free. But the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, New York Times.
You should succumb to the Financial Times too. They're pretty good.
Well,
they've started to admit that Trump's tax cuts are working, and that's shocking. Frankly,
the corporate tax cuts.
Yeah.
Yeah, they seem to be. It's weird that all these companies are giving Trump credit, and I'm trying to figure it out. So. By the way, have we already broken the record for longest ever podcast?
I think we've broken the record, and we're now circling back onto a subject we've already talked about.
But I do have a question. Like, why is you wouldn't expect Starbucks or Apple to want to give Trump credit? Now, there's 2 theories. One is that somehow they get some benefit from sucking up to the president. By credit, I mean they're announcing that because of the tax cut, they can give these one-time benefits to their workers or something. The other theory is just that their workers know they're getting the benefit themselves, and if they don't hear that they're going to get something out of it, they're going to rebel. So I don't know. What's your theory?
My theory is that they stick out like a sore thumb if they don't pass something on to their workers. So I guess that's your second theory.
That's the second theory.
But you don't need to choose. They both operate. Both theories are operative. They could be 2 reasons why they're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine
it's surprising to me. I would expect Starbucks to say we're giving a raise to our workers. It has nothing to do with the tax cuts. Damn it.
So would I. That's surprising. Yeah. I mean, and I will say, and this is alarming to me. Trump and the Republicans' numbers have been slowly edging up since the tax cut passed. It's now a significant amount. And with stuff like this happening, that's, I assume, good for Trump when companies are saying things like this. I mean, the truth is, and this scares me too, but if he had much in the way of self-control, he might be able to, get the numbers significantly higher than they are by the midterms. I don't know.
Well, correct. I think that's right. And I hate this generous corporate givebacks, because the whole idea is corporations are supposed to be forced to give wages to workers, not out of the goodness of their paternalistic hearts. They give their vassals an increase. So this whole PR campaign, which aren't these corporations now trickling down and being generous? It repulses me, but it seems to be working. So
seems to be.
Anyway, do we have anything else to talk about?
I just want to underscore how horrible I think Trump is. I mean, he really is.
How horrible is he, Bob?
Really. The answer to that is really. Scary. But
you're more scared now than you were when he was elected?
That's a good question. Well, in a way, there are, I was never I was never all that high decibel about the fascist threat myself. And so the fact that it's materialized a little on the immigration front, witness the Greyhound bus anecdote. But by and large, he is, as you said, he's obeyed court rulings. I mean, it's amazing that we're grateful for that, the president who obeys court rulings, but we are. So I never thought it was going to turn into the Third Reich like within a year or anything, or even 4 years. Well, so that wasn't my concern so much. I mean, as you know, one of my big areas of concern is foreign policy, and he has turned out to be the worst of all worlds. I mean, I predicted that he would become largely a captive of the Republican foreign policy establishment, which is essentially neocon, and I maintain that has happened in spades, but even worse. It's like...
It hasn't happened in spades. I thought the neocons are still pissed at him because he hasn't, his presence in theory, well, maybe it should, I agree it shouldn't be there, and it's permanent, much smaller and much less invasive than they wanted. And he's basically...
What, in Syria?
He's dropped the idea that it's the job of America to control the Middle East, hasn't he? He's farmed that out.
On the contrary, Mickey, do you realize how radical it is to say we are going to put a permanent, well, certainly, a long-term force of our soldiers in Syria to support separatists who are going to carve out this space in Syria, and we're going to use that as an anti-Iranian wedge, and we're going to use it to keep the Syrian government from ever actually consolidating power. We're going to kind of permanently destabilize Syria. They haven't said all of that, but it's the idea. That's like no neocon could have hoped for more from George Bush. I mean, look, obviously it was too late for him to get into the Syrian civil war per se in a big way, but this is the biggest. This is amazing to me that this is happening. And again, It's the worst of both worlds in the sense that, like, maybe George W. Bush could have been talked into it, but he would have had the presence of mind to give Turkey a heads up, right? He would have at least gauged how much blowback he's going to get from Turkey if you support Kurdish separatists. And this is just, the nefariousness, the perniciousness of neoconservative hawkishness combined with just disarray and disorganization and mercurialness. It's the worst of all worlds. Are we sure
that the Turkish attack isn't going to backfire on Turkey?
Oh, it may well. But that's not necessarily going to be good.
So far, everybody who's taken on the Kurds has lost, no?
Right. I mean, no, it's going to be a mess. That's what I'm saying. Syria was just starting to return to some semblance of stability. Maybe refugees would start returning. Oh, but no, we're gonna reignite the chaos. And meanwhile, well, anyway,
but I would claim that there's a reason why the neocons still hate Trump, and it's not just the violation of norms. The other point I would make is, it was recently pointed out to me, the only people who really thought, maybe, is this true? That the only people who thought Trump was actually going to be a fascist Nazi, half Hitler, were on the left. That the never-Trumpers on the right never really made that argument. Is that true? I can't think of an example.
No, I think David Frum made the authoritarian argument.
But they all make the authoritarian argument. They don't make the fascist argument.
Well, it's a fine line.
I think it is a fine line. But does Frum make sort of subtle allusions to how this is Hitlerite? I think Frum is all about Poland and Hungary, I think. He says Trump is going to be like the leaders of those countries. I don't know,
but when you said that's not the only reason the neocons oppose him, do you have some other...
Well, the neocons oppose him because he's not actually pursuing as interventionist a foreign policy as they would like, yeah.
What do you think they want him to do that he's not doing? He's arming the Ukraine, Mickey. He's arming the Ukrainian rebels. He's establishing a military presence in Syria. He is supporting an aggressive Saudi Arabian campaign against people perceived as Iranian proxies. I mean, fighting Iran is high on the neocon agenda. I don't mean necessarily having a war, but I mean pushing back against Iran is high on their agenda. He is fiercely anti-Iran, ardently pro-Israel. His policy is turning out to be de facto anti-Russian in Ukraine. What's not to like from a neocon point of view?
Max Boot wrote an article at the beginning of the Trump administration about what his ideal Syrian policy would be. And I have a memory that it was more interventionist than has happened, but maybe you're right. Maybe Trump is actually doing it.
I just think 85% of their reservations on grounds of foreign policy have evaporated. Unless they agree with me that he's just scarily mercurial and disorganized.
Well, anyway, you're really a never-Trumper, except you vehemently oppose their foreign policy.
Wait, I'm what?
You're a never-Trumper in that you don't think Trump is bad because he's a fascist, but you do think he's bad because he's violating norms.
Well, I think he has authoritarian tendencies. No, he bears watching on the whole creepy authoritarian front for sure. He's corrupt. He doesn't understand the distinction between his personal interest and his public obligation.
But I think that's what the never-Trumpers think.
Well, I think that's true.
It's not what the left-wing anti-Trumpers at the New Yorker think, which is they have this crazy idea that somehow he's Hitler. So,
well, it depends on what you mean by Hitler. I mean, he.
It's not what Adam Gopnik thinks. Adam Gopnik is constantly invoking Hitler.
Do not get me started on Adam Gopnik.
Oh, go ahead, please.
He wrote this incredibly stupid piece about my book when it first came out.
Okay.
But I replied with admirable restraint and understatement in a New York Times piece I wrote about.
Is this the Buddhist book?
Yeah.
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 Okay. I'll have to look that
up. So
we'll
link to my piece. This is a good excuse. So this is totally a record. At this point, I think we have no choice but to go on, Mickey.
I think we should just keep it permanently going on. We'll go on until the midterm elections. We'll just always be here for you.
Yeah, it's just like I'm brushing my teeth now. You can check in.
It'll be like a hotline. Anytime we have something we want to pontificate about.
Yeah,
this is always here. No, I think we should draw it to a close.
I think 90 minutes. I think we made our point.
I think our long national
nightmare. Should we give an award to anyone? We should say we should bury something right here at this point. And if anybody watched this far, they should signify as much in the comments section by quoting this word. What is the word going to be? We've already used revanchism and irredentism. I'm not sure if they're the same thing.
The word should be limon, which is the flavor of Jell-O.
In French?
In Spanish.
In Spanish.
Limon.
Limon. Okay. Anyone who puts Limon in the comment section wins a special treat.
Anyway, it's been great. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, same here.
Maybe I didn't look like a fish this time, thanks to my new camera.
Well, we will leave that open for discussion by the one person who mentions the word limon.
Yeah. Okay.
See you around.
Take care.